Hi. Well, what a weekend. I'm looking forward to a nice, relaxing week. I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna get into this week. I'll have to think about it. I lean pretty far left. And so I tend to find company with other left-leaning people, which oftentimes leads to me to the realization that a lot of left-leaning people are, we used to have a word for it back in the day, fucking posers, right? They like to wear the costume of leftism, and that's all it is to them. And so I have a hard time having healthy relationships with those individuals. And I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to share a piece that I wrote that is kind of an amalgam of several different experiences I've had with some left-leaning people, kind of put into this fun story that I've framed. This is called "This is Probably Why I Don't Have Any Friends." My buddy Chris considers himself to be imbued with the punk rock spirit. He tells me this as he's showing me his collection of music t-shirts, all purchased from Hot Topic. The Ramones are his favorite, but he's also quite taken by the Misfits. I ask him how many local shows he's attended, and he says he can't afford it, not since spending all his extra cash on festival tickets, one of those big events with endless corporate sponsorships like Amazon, Spotify, and Netflix. I listen while I sip from the ice-cold can of Pabst Blue Ribbon he put in my hand upon my entrance. I ask if he's visited any local breweries. He says he's not interested in trying any new beverages. He'll just stick with the tried and true, and that's just his preference. Then he shows me his music room in the basement. This is where he keeps his records and state-of-the-art sound system, all of which are held in custom-built cabinets. And even though Chris has 4 kids, this setup is that for which he is proudest. Apparently, he started buying records as an adolescent with dollars given to him by his parents, who seemed to be pretty affluent. Now his hoard of LPs numbers in the thousands. Then he shows me his most recent acquisition. It's an original sealed pressing of the debut album by the Stooges. It cost him hundreds. He says he ordered it off eBay, charged it to his Amex, and now he's paying in installments. Then we get on the subject of home ownership because I was curious if his home is expensive. He says he's got a pretty decent mortgage. He only pays a couple grand a month, but that includes his property tax and insurance. And as long as the neighborhood maintains its current quality, free of low-income tenants, he predicts that this property will be a great investment. And he looks over the carefully placed CDs and cassette tapes lining the shelves alphabetically with the names on the spines, all facing the same direction. Then, in an attempt to change the subject, I ask if his offspring come down here often. He says, no, that would warrant a harsh physical punishment. He doesn't even, quote, let my wife come down to clean it. He pulls out an album by Bad Religion. He puts it on the turntable and flips a switch on the console. The record begins to spin. He says he's loved this band since he first heard them on Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, the best video game released on the Sony PlayStation. He still has his original disc. I ask him if he's also a fan of Green Day. He says, no, they're sellouts. Chris prefers to shop from the independent section at Walmart and Target. I ask if he's been to the family-owned record store down the street. He says it's never open when he needs to do his shopping, which is typically about 9 p.m. because he works late. Then he mentions he's up for a promotion, and after putting in all these hours, even working weekend shifts to bring him more and more high-end clients, he's a shoo-in. It's a management position. Another guy applied, but he doesn't even have a college education, so Chris doesn't understand why the other guy is in consideration. He probably goes home to a studio apartment. He says this and laughs. Then he turns up the volume, says this next track is where it's at, and he pretends he's strumming a guitar for several seconds. Then he imagines he's drumming and waves his invisible sticks. Adorning the walls all around us are memorabilia, including a guitar signed by a famous musician who has since been verifiably accused of pedophilia. I asked Chris about the instrument, and he says he won it at an auction. It was a benefit. Sure, the auction house takes a percentage, that's their commission, but the rest went to an organization which gives televisions to grade school kids with perfect academic attendance. They must have a record free of tardiness or absences. Chris says he tries to do his part. He fancies himself an activist. But at least in this case, he gets something for his donation. Plus, he knows where the money is going as opposed to most local nonprofits and political movements like BLM. He says he supports black liberation and that black lives do in fact matter to him, but he doesn't trust bail funds or black history education, mostly because he believes incarceration can fix what's broken in the hearts of men, and because black history typically paints white people as oppressive, which is offensive. And while he doesn't agree with some bits about how the government operates, America is still the best nation, and it's better to build up something rather than to tear it down for the sake of complaining. So, because I'm kind of growing impatient with his fakeness, and because he's coming off as a bit racist, I ask him point blank how he feels about reparations. He says he's fine with it, which catches me off guard. That honestly wasn't the response I expected. Maybe I've been mistaken, but he says, as long as he gets something. He's white, sure, but life hasn't exactly been the kindest to him. He wasn't born with a silver spoon either, but he doesn't play the victim. However, if we're handing out cash to those whose families have struggled way back in the past, he should at least get a gift certificate. After all, his great-grandfather was an Irish immigrant, and being a slave wasn't any different than being an indentured servant. He asks if I know about the potato famine, and I say for that he can blame England. He says, I'm just saying, the Irish were treated just as bad as Africans, but we never rioted like they did in Watts or Ferguson. We just grabbed our bootstraps and gave them a lift. And I point out that violence is what happens when nobody is listening and all you have are bottles and rags. He says, no, all of that is bad. Burning down businesses and looting, that's crass. That won't fix any situation. I ask what he thinks people should do when they're frustrated with their representation. He says they should vote more, try to elect some good politicians, go to the polls every chance they get. I ask about gerrymandering. He says that excuse is bullshit. Nobody's stopping anyone from voting for representatives who will respect their wishes. It's just that when the best man wins, they need to be respectful, even if it's not their preferred candidate. But keep voting, and eventually there will come some more equitable legislation. And the record ends. He asks if I want him to flip it over to hear the rest or put on something different. I decide to get snide, be a bit of a dick. I ask if he's got Anima by Tool. That for some reason I suddenly want to hear that song Hooker with a Penis. He said he likes that song too, but he prefers the one about California falling into the ocean because it's become a toxic pit, harboring those who value wokeness over the First and Second Amendments. I ask if he's a libertarian. He says yes, mixed with an anarchist. He asks me where I stand politically, and I explain I'm an egalitarian mixed with a bit of democratic socialist. He just shakes his head and says the problem is the federal government getting in the way of the people to live freely. I remind him that we need a federal government to enforce the Constitution, which he just moments ago defended, and to protect the rights of the populace. He says he agrees, but when it comes down to it, he'd rather see it all in ashes than to see the flourishing of communists. And I express my confusion because, you see, the right to free speech is a social construct to which we've all agreed, making the Bill of Rights kind of a communist document. Therefore, we can add more to it if we choose, like making a law which gives the people control over the means of production. If we really wanted, we could write a law which draws the money from the account of the top 1%, and we could give it to the other 350 million Americans. And I mentioned that there were 141 new billionaires made in 2023, their gross income totaling over 14 trillion. That amount split up amongst the rest of us would put an extra 150 grand into the pockets of each and every person, and we could just decide to do this. He says that would be theft. I say no, that would be our money returning. They've devalued our labor and overcharged us on the resources we need to live. This would correct that imbalance. He says no, it's theirs, fair and square. They earned it. I laugh and say, what if I buy that Stooges record from you for $20? He says, hell no, that wouldn't be worth it. I say, but what if you desperately needed the money to feed your family? Would you take it then? He says, no, I'd throw it away first. I'd rather my kids starve than surrender. I say, but what if I funded propaganda to convince you it was the right thing to do? And if you still choose not to, you're actually making our country worse. And that if you don't sell it to me today for $20, tomorrow it'll be $15 and $10 next week. And then I'll pay a dude to harass you. I'll dress him up in blue. I'll put a badge on his chest and I'll convince him to not even stop after you're dead. And I create a generational curse so your great-great-great-grandkids will still hurt. And he laughs again, calls me intense, and says he has to get to family dinner. He leads me to the exit and I am dismissed. And the point of this story is, the greatest enemies to progress aren't conservatives, because truthfully, there's a very small number of them, a manageable volume. It's not a fair fight between us. It's completely uneven. No, it's liberals who stand willfully ignorant, purposefully uninformed, and directionless, and they wear leftism like a shirt, easy to remove if they're forced with being put into the dirt, and they don't stand firmly opposed to privatization in the name of commerce, and they learn capitalism equates to freedom, so the fire of the free market must burn. And this is why everyone I meet ends up disturbed, thinking I'm a jerk, and why Chris is no longer a friend. But on the bright side, I do know a guy with an unsecured basement full of valuable records, which will be easy to take because his wife and kids are forbidden to enter, and Chris usually works pretty late. Thank you.
Y'all put your hands together for Ed the Wordsmith.